Hello, and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and we go over the weekly stories Tony's posted on his Substack about Scientology, Church of Scientology, and the activities of it over the last week. Hey, Tony, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Chris. As you can see, I'm on the road this weekend. I'm at my mother's place in preparation for my talk at the CFI West event on Sunday morning. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. I love that place, by the way. I've spoken there a couple times, and it's right by the base. So
Yeah.
might fly by and see what's happening over in PAC while you're there. So this week there were some pretty interesting stories, and one that I am actually personally a little confused about. Maybe you can help clarify it for me. Is there's some brouhaha about Danny Masterson's guns, and it was obviously alarming at how many he had. I mean, Jesus Christ, that was a long list, and some of those were some pretty powerful weapons. But how is this a thing, and what's the problem with this?
Yeah. It was actually an issue in the trials because Jane Doe 1, in her testimony of her attack, she said that at one point in Danny's room, when he was attacking her, she reached over for something, and he then kind of pushed her hand out of the way and grabbed a drawer, opened a nightstand, and pulled out a handgun.
Right.
And if you remember, if you were there in the courtroom, you know she wasn't saying that he was aiming it at her, but he was just kind of holding it up. And he said something like "keep your mouth shut" or something like that. But it's very clear that he had brandished a weapon during this alleged rape. Well, he's been convicted now.
Yeah, right.
During this rape, he was brandishing a weapon, and then there was a lot of controversy over the fact that she had said that she testified to that, but then in an LAPD report, there was no mention of it. So the defense tried to do a lot with that. But the point is that there was a stipulation between the two sides that the jury could be told that when that occurred, Danny Masterson did have a registered firearm. So, in other words, that would lend some credence to what she's saying, and they allow the jury to hear that. Well, I remember at the time, Chris, being told that the jury's going to hear that he had a weapon, but the truth is that he's a collector and he's got a lot of firearms. That's what I had been told. I didn't know exactly how many or what type.
Yeah.
I had just been told that he's a real, fan of guns. And so when he was indicted in 2020, I believe, that's when he first was told by the court, you need to turn in any firearms because he's, under indictment for a violent felony.
Right.
And, there was no controversy at that time. Sure, okay, we'll get the guns turned in. And it wasn't until just very recently, after two trials, a conviction, a sentencing, Uh, and also after he was convicted on May 31st, if you look at the record, they then got another form. The defense was giving another form. If he's got any firearms, he's got to turn them in. So even though he was supposed to have done that 3 years ago, he was definitely also told to do it when he was convicted at the end of May.
Mm.
But now, out of nowhere, there's this report from the probation department saying that, okay, he has 23 guns, and a certain number of them have been turned over to safekeeping, apparently to a dealer, but there's 10 that weren't. And if you went through the actual list, there were 9. Apparently there was one that was destroyed or something. But
Okay.
I took that list and carefully looked up the brief descriptions they did and looked them up online, tried to get a little more complete description of each one, because I didn't know what kind of guns he had, right?
Mm.
And so there's the list that the probation department said he had definitely turned over, and the list of 9 that were unaccounted for. And there's handguns in there, there's shotguns, but what was kind of interesting was of the 9 that are unaccounted for were like 4 or 5 semi-automatic rifles, like
Right.
the AR-15 type, the
Right.
assault rifles, so called.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting. And so they had to have a hearing. And I don't think this was planned or anything. And so they had a hearing, and a reporter who was there told me that the judge was just like, "What's up? What's going on?" And so she gave them until December 7th to account for those guns. Now, the
Oh,
defense was saying, "Look, this is just a clerical error. They're not, they're not missing." And so I have a feeling on December 7th, they're going to come back and offer some proof that all 23 guns have been turned over for safekeeping with this dealer or somebody. But they better have a pretty good documentation on that, because I don't know if you saw you saw my story.
hmm
The reporter Megan Kuniff was actually in courtroom that day, and very generously submitted a report for the bunker. And she talked to the Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 3, and they made it very clear they are very unhappy about this.
right.
And I don't blame them. I mean, they testified to being very worried about Danny's larger group of friends and family. And with these weapons out there, it's just unsettling. So, like I said, I think the defense will probably show up December 7th with a pretty good accounting of all this so that the judge has nothing else to question. But it is a little odd that this collection of some pretty serious weaponry was not turned in 3 years ago when it was supposed to have been.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we can always go stereotypically to, psychotic criminal love of guns. And yet, that was a long list of guns, man. I don't know that that's a stereotype here. Like, damn, you weren't kidding about those assault weapons, or so-called, right? I know that, these semi-automatic weapons are like, there was just so many of them, and it wasn't just one M16 or something like that. We're talking about bam, 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 and a number of handguns. This was a man who liked his guns, and it only becomes even that much more disturbing when he's a violent felon. So, um, anyway, I don't know that there's. I think unsettling is the right word.
Yeah,
For how.
I mean, yes, I mean, some of my conservative friends would say, look, there's nothing unusual about these
Right.
guns, and he wasn't breaking the law when he owned them, and I understand that. But
Yeah.
look, 3 years ago, they were supposed to be accounted for and stored away, and they weren't. And I can understand why the Jane Does would be very unhappy about that.
Yep.
And the defense better come up with a pretty good accounting on December 7th.
That's right. Exactly. Well, moving along, we had a pretty interesting photo op story, or a lot of photos in this one, from the IAS patron ball. And this was, Jenna's first picture in quite a while, where we got a pretty clear shot of her. And a lot of the big money guys, the whales, as we so
Well,
call them.
Ryan, so let me point out why those were together.
Yeah.
Because, okay, so we had the picture of Jenna, and I just wanted to post that because I thought that's great to see. Because we had pictures of her Friday and Saturday night all dressed up,
Mm-hmm.
but I hadn't seen any pictures of her Sunday night when she was actually emceeing the event. And that's what Alex at Hostate Alex got and sent to me, was a photo of Jenna on stage emceeing the Sunday night charity concert. That's fun to see, because we'd seen it on the flyer that she was supposed to do that, so it's good to have that evidence.
Yep.
And then also, yeah, we had numerous photos of the venue so that we could count the chairs, and then a
Yeah.
new one came in a little later that was even clearer.
Yeah.
And we've done this in the past where our readers are very patient. They'll go through and count every single little chair. And we've gotten enough views now. I don't think there's any doubt that tent held a maximum of about 1,000 people.
Right.
And that is really surprising, because Scientology will always say after one of those events, they've had anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 people in there.
Yep.
So now we have really good evidence that they've always been exaggerating. I've always said divide by 7. I've always said that. And this
That's
turned
right.
out to be exactly right. They say they have 7,000, they really have 1,000. And why is that significant? Because remember, this is an organization that continues to tell people they have millions of members.
Yeah.
But yet these venues where they have their biggest events, Ruth Eckerd Hall only holds 2,000. This tent only holds 1,000. And these are the same venues they've been using for years and years and years. So it is significant, and it's great to get those photos. The other part of the post, Alex and his friend from Canada, Jeff, was it? I
Hmm.
believe, yeah, Jeff,
Belmont.
PTS for Life.
Hmm.
After the IS hearing, they went IS event. They went north and stopped in at an org in Sunderland, and were invited in by a staffer there. And they saw some Impact magazines on the shelf, and they grabbed one. They actually grabbed several, but
Ah,
that's the new one.
got
And
it.
so I'm obsessed with Impact Magazine because that's the magazine where they publish the pictures of the whales.
Yeah.
So Alex posted the contents of the magazine, and then I just grabbed out of it just the whales. That's from, we think, maybe like March of this year, earlier this year, something like that. Was those are the whales who were celebrated with their trophies earlier this year. The people that were just celebrated at this last IAS event a couple weeks ago, we won't see pictures of them for probably another 5 or 6 weeks at the earliest. Okay.
Right.
But
Right.
the ones that Alex found and that I posted were from earlier this year, and we had not seen those before. So, it's always really instructive to see all these people that are donating $1 million or more to Scientology's legal slush fund, basically. And you can
Basically.
see why David Miscavige can just spend endlessly in court.
Yeah, exactly. We really have faces with the names and everything. And um, I just got a comment for people who, kind of fly by this stuff that it's really interesting to get a good look at this stuff and see the variety of people who are involved with Scientology at its highest levels. These are the big money people. These are the OTs. These are the guys who spend time, even vacations at Flag, and don't mind dropping big money. And they are from all over the place. Lots of different countries represented, lots of different job areas, you could say, represented, even ages represented. It's an interesting survey, and I only point that out because people sometimes, kind of miss the obvious right there, that it's like anybody can fall for Scientology. Your money's not a protection, your intelligence isn't a protection. And it's a point that needs to be made from time to time, because these are not just a bunch of stupid idiots. But boy, are they indoctrinated. So also on that was that size point. I wanted to just add that spending years on events in PAC, years working on the ushering, getting people's butts into the seats so that the event could start on time was my function. And then I was around for the head count after. And they take it so seriously. They have like 5 or 6 guys all over the venue counting heads, counting chairs, and keeping all this. And then it all comes together. And the high senior people, the highest people on the base, are there for those head counts. That head count is a very important number for them. And this was always, usually at the shrine where we were doing these kind of things, where I was watching this happen. I just think it's so interesting that they are so blatantly lying about their numbers when you can literally count the same way actually they do. So I only wanted to maybe say that because it's not like they don't know exactly how many people are in that space. They just,
Exactly. They have to know the real numbers.
yeah,
But
they do. Yeah.
and that number of seven tends to hold. I remember, I'm thinking back a decade ago when they opened Superpower, and it did look like a very impressive crowd outside the building. And they were claiming like 13,000. And then, but Mike Rinder had gone up in a helicopter and had managed to get a couple of shots that covered the entire crowd. See, that's what Scientology always cleverly does, is they give you a wide angle view with a camera that stretches the view, and then you can't see the edges. You can never, so it just feels like it goes on forever. There's just people forever. But then Mike was overhead and he managed to get the entire crowd in a single view. And again, we've got these readers. They're just awesome. They just start counting little individual heads. And several of them all came up with about 2,500. So again, it's about 6 or 7 times is their exaggeration, and it's been pretty consistent over the years. And they know that if they say 7,000 people fit in that tent for that event, that the Guardian or this whatever
That's right.
Sunday Times, they're going to have to say that Scientology said 7,000 people were there. And so it's just good to get that actual photograph and say, look, there's only 1,000 seats.
That's right.
You know,
That's right. And how interesting that is for all those earlier years. We finally got confirmation of it, like you said. I think that's an important point. Okay, now moving on to the legal front. A couple stories. First off, Leah's team's what was this? Slows down lawsuit.
yeah,
Slows down?
it makes sense to me, but I figured some readers would be a little disappointed because Leah filed her lawsuit August 2nd, basically alleging fair game. She had her podcast about fair game. Now she's suing over fair game, and I know people are excited. And I've said many times I like this lawsuit because she's got so much specific evidence about not only how they've said all these terrible things about her, but that they've coordinated campaigns in order to make it hard for her to make a living. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a significant thing in court. She wasn't waiting around for them to respond. She almost immediately added to the complaint with saying, listen, they're still harassing me right today. She added declarations from Mike Rinder and Claire Headley. She then filed for a preliminary injunction to try to get Scientology to stop the harassment. I mean, it was like every week there was a bombshell coming from Leah Remini in this lawsuit, and Scientology hadn't even responded. Well, Scientology then did respond, and they're based. I've said it to you before. Their response is essentially, well, we're only calling Leah names because she called us names first, and
Exactly.
they want to portray it as a First Amendment fight.
That's right.
And they filed, I don't know, I'm getting confused now which one they but anyway, just a massive amount of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And both sides are just like the vitriol in the both sides of this filing is just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the heat was, it was for us observers, it's great. It's interesting, it's fascinating. They're calling them, they're saying, accusing them of this. But Scientology's come back with these anti-slap, uh, motions, and that's serious. That could really, limit the case. So I think both sides came together and said, "Look, let's take our time, respond to each other, get the arguments in full, give the judge everything he needs." So they just kind of slowed down the schedule a little bit, so that instead of things kind of coming to a head in November, they're pushing it back basically to January. Of course, that gets you through the holidays and everything too. So I think it's just that this is a major fight for both sides, and I think they want to make sure they do it right and they don't miss anything. And so the fact that both sides agreed together to submit this to the judge and the judge signed off on it, that was interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
That the rhetoric is really heated, but I think both sides have realized, no, there's some serious ideas in this case that we need the judge to take seriously. Let's take our time a little bit. So that was the
Yeah.
latest in that case.
Okay, good. Yeah, just kind of bring the volume down a little, bring the tone down just a little bit. Now, on the other hand, the JD attorneys are angry, very
Well,
angry.
no, no,
No,
no. The
no, that,
JD attorney,
that's Scientology, right?
the Jane Doe attorneys. This really impressed me.
Hmm?
Just to review real quick, the Jane Does sued Danny Masterson, the Church of Scientology, back in August 2019, even before Danny had been charged criminally.
Right.
And they are not suing him for the rapes. They're suing him and the church for what they say is a coordinated campaign of harassment since they came forward. So they're suing over the surveillance, the hacking, poisoning of pets, things, these things that they've alleged.
Yeah.
But that lawsuit was put on hold while the trials were going on, and it just got going again. And so now Scientology has filed these motions to strike and motions, anti-slap motions, but they're basing it on the 2020 complaint, the First Amendment complaint.
Mm.
And which I remember at the time, I thought that was odd because both sides had already talked about there's going to be a new complaint coming. So Scientology went back and said, look, and just to remind everybody, this lawsuit was initially forced into arbitration. and then an appeals court ruled that no, the things that they're alleging, like the stalking and the harming of pets, occurred after they left the church, so those contracts don't apply. And you can tell the latest things, David Miscavige and Scientology are still hopping mad over that ruling. Um, and so Scientology is saying, look, if that's the case, and this case is only about things that have happened since they left, then pull out all the stuff in the lawsuit about when they were Scientologists. And also pull out the stuff about our policies as a church. And then, so that was interesting. I thought it was odd they were doing that to a 3-year-old complaint when they knew a new one was coming. But then the Jane Doe attorneys, John Kucera and Seth Lerman, they filed their opposition to Scientology's motions. And I got to tell you, it's calm, it's logical, it just reads really smart and explains calmly. No, the lawsuit needs those things about when they were Scientologists to understand why they did what they did later.
Yeah.
And you just look at it and go, this just makes perfect sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wondered how Scientology was going to react to that. Well, this week they're hopping mad, man. You saw some of that sneering kind of tone there, because what you got to always remember that when Scientology appears to be filing a brief for the judge of the court, they're actually writing it for David Miscavige. That's their number one responsibility, is to make sure that Miscavige is happy with what they're filing. And so it's over the top sneering and, you know, now that's the style. Now, as for the substance, they make some points about that Kucera and Lerman are misstating the law, and that that they really can't try to litigate Scientology's policies. So I don't know which way it's going to go. My first impression of Judge Upinder Kalra was from the previous time that he was a no nonsense guy. I don't know that he's going to appreciate all this screeching and whining by the Scientology attorneys. It would really be refreshing to see him kind of knock them down for that. But I don't know. We'll see. That's coming up pretty fast. I think that's Wednesday. We're going to get to see what Judge Kalra thinks of this particular issue with the motion to strike. I think it's going to be really interesting.
I think so too. It'll really kind of give us some idea of where he's coming from as a judge. And that's kind of crucial in things like this, because it's all about legal interpretation at the end of the day. That's how this all works. You might interpret it one way. Doesn't mean that's what the judge is going to say. And in cases like this, it's really we know from history, right? We know even from the structure of the law that coming in on a religion is always difficult. And you and I might not agree that Scientology is a religion. I don't think it is, but legally it is. And the judge has to consider it that way. And so all these First Amendment issues come in about these policies and whether we can even look at them or not. Even when you think common sense should say, well, of course, those policies inform this harassment and stalking and all this stuff. But, these legal things, man, they just can be so crazy in what's allowable and what's not.
I think bunker readers were really thrilled to see Kucera and Lerman spell out that the reason that they were including Scientology's policies was not that they have any problem with people believing in such things. It's not about the beliefs, it's about the conduct. That even if you can believe whatever you want, but you can't just act any way you want to act. And if you harm people, then you can be sued over it. So I think people really liked seeing them say that. And then Scientology, of course, was acting all offended. But again, I don't know. Scientology may have the winning argument. So many times, Chris, how many times have we seen where it just feels like Scientology is advancing the most ridiculous argument? The judge says, "Yeah, they're right," and we're just always left like, "What?"
Yeah.
So Wednesday will be an interesting test on that.
Yeah, exactly. And that is what all those tax exempt funds are going for, by the way, is the big lawyers who really can do that well. Right. That's what they're paying for. All right. Now, sad news, as our last story this week was a memoriam for Mick Wenlock. I had some interaction with him years ago, but he was a friend of the bunker. What can we say about this?
Well, I didn't actually interact with him too much. I think he
Okay.
meant a lot more to you former Sea Org people because
Mhm.
he had started one of the very earliest online forums for ex-Sea Org people. It was a Yahoo group. And I've talked to other former Sea Org people that said that was a huge thing for them, being able to talk to other Sea Org people. And, you know, he just was really well liked, a very funny guy, lived in Denver, but he was from England, right? And so when I was told that he had died and only 70, um, I knew he meant a lot, like I said, to a lot of ex-Sea Org people that had been helped by his work.
Yeah.
And I wanted to find a way to, you know, give a little tribute to him. And so I was looking at things and realized that in 2007, he had told his own story at one, I think it was ESMB, in an installment thing, and it was amazing. You know, because how many, you know, your story, so many other people. The tough thing is after you've signed your billion-year contract and you've worked for them for a decade or two, you come out and it's just like, how do you get going again? And
That's
it's
right.
just so difficult. And his was one of the worst I've ever read because he
Mm.
not only came out of the Sea Org, there's so many levels to why it was such a sad situation because first of all he still really wanted to get back in the Sea Org. He felt he was, you know, being kicked out for from justice reason, whatever.
Right.
But he immediately had to take care of his two kids. His wife was off in the RPF in Florida. He was in Denmark with his two kids, one of whom was born deaf and blind and was
Mm.
only 3 years old, and he had no money, nowhere to go. I mean, that first moment when he wasn't even, he was having a hard time just walking down the street because he had a 7 year old, a 3 year old that he had to carry, multiple uh suitcases and a backpack. And it was like he wasn't even sure how he was going to walk away from the building. So really vivid material like that. I thought it was absolutely great. And so I put together all the installments, edited it down a little bit so it fit in one post. And I think people really appreciated that. And again, it's just something that so many people have been through, but he did one of the best jobs describing it.
Mm.
And I just thought, and I took the opportunity. I said, listen, if you're thinking about going through this and getting out, going through that transition, look up the Aftermath Foundation. They've got people there that'll help you out. You can
Yep.
talk to them. And so I just, you know, I hope mixed story is the kind of thing that can inspire people that no matter how bad Scientology dumps you and tries to leave you without any resources, you can make it. You know, there's a way to get through it. And he ended up, you know, being somebody that people really enjoyed and really admired.
Wow. It's quite a survival story, actually, because it's so different than from now. Not that it's easy now, but at least society doesn't judge you the way they used to. At least people know, at least cults are now a genre under true crime. People are aware of this stuff. And if you say, hey, I came out of Scientology, I'm having a rough time, more people now are probably going to lend a sympathetic ear and maybe help out even financially, where before people didn't have any clue. And unfortunately, with pre-internet or just around the time the internet was going, they didn't have a clue either coming out of the cult. There
Yeah.
was no
Yeah.
idea I was just in a cult, right? So it's we've come so far with this in
And that
such
was
a time.
that was one detail I thought was great. He was talking about when he was trying to get some help and was trying to explain why he was in such a tough situation. He didn't want to mention Scientology because he didn't want his situation to make the church look bad. That's
Exactly.
how he was still, you know, completely indoctrinated by Scientology.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the resources now available to people are so much easier to get to and so much more prolific than back then. You know, it's really being studied, it's really being talked about, and there's so many articles on it. Not just the sensational stuff, recovery work and things like that. It's all out there for people. So anyway, and I would be remiss if I didn't say, look, you can contact me too. I do consultation for people coming out of these situations. So, you know, so there's help available. And on that happy note, I guess we say, what are we looking at for this week? Any preview of anything? You have anything you want to say?
Uh, By the time you post this, I have another remembrance of Mick by Bruce Hines. That's really wonderful.
Okay, good.
And later in the week, I got something pretty good coming out in a big way. So hopefully later this week, you keep an eye out. That's all I
Excellent.
can say.
All right. Fair enough. Well, thank you very much for all of that. Check out Tony's Substack. The address of it is right there on the screen under his name. Sign up, get your notifications, as we say every week, and keep yourself in the loop on this stuff. And of course, like, subscribe, share my work as well. And on that, we will see you guys next week.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
That's right. Happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.